Hey everyone, welcome back. This is the second part of the tutorial. In this section, we're gonna look at this in some detail. I'm gonna tell you kind of what it does. But before we do that, we're gonna want to save our project. So in processing, everything is called a sketch. So what we're gonna do is just do File, Save As, and I made a folder for mine called Processing Tutorial, and then I'm just gonna call this Sketch 1. All right. Now, once you've saved this, if you head over to your Windows Explorer and you look at the folder wherever you saved yours, you're going to see a folder with the same name as what you called your project. And in that, you're going to find two files, sketch1.pde and then sketch.properties. So every time you create a project, you're going to see these two files get made. Now this file right here, the .pde file, that's the one that has all this information here. So this is the void, setup, and size. All the information saved there. The sketch properties, that's extra information. Okay, so we're not going to worry about that. The only thing we want to look at right now is just sketch1.pde. You're going to notice that it does create the folder and it creates the file name with the exact same name. If I try to change this file name and restart the project, it won't run. You have to have a file with the same name as the folder it's in order to run a processing program. And this comes in handy later when we're going to switch over to using a different editor called Sublime. And we need to remember that idea that the .pde file, this file here, has to have the exact same name as this folder. Alright, so let's head back over to processing. And let's actually talk about what this does. Now, setup, you see this word here, void, and then you have setup, and then you have these parentheses and these brackets. It's kind of obvious that we're putting our code between these brackets, and we wrote these between these two. And you can write a lot more stuff in here, and we're going to in just a little bit. But first I want to tell you what this is it's something that's built into processing, and it's something that's needed whenever you start a project. So you have to have setup, and if you don't have a setup, the program's just not going to run. You actually don't even need size. If you run this without size, you'll get a window that's 100 pixels by 100 pixels. If I put my size back in and run it, I get a window just like we saw last time that's 500 by 500 pixels. Alright, so in here we actually have two things that are called functions. This is a function that is essential to running processing, and it's a function that we've made. We've made this setup. Even though it's part of processing looks for this particular function. This setup is something we made, and you can tell it's what we made because of these brackets. And we'll come back and review this idea in a minute. But size is also a function. It's just a function that's built into processing. All right, and you're going to notice if I do this and I change this here, I'll actually get a window that is a little bit bigger. So this size will change based on this. So you might be looking at this thinking, well, all right, well, this is obviously the width of my window, and this is obviously the height. And you'd be right. If I change this here, I get 200, and so this is only 200 pixels high now. All right, so I'm gonna come back here. I'm gonna change this to 500 500. Now, I'm saying the word function. These are actually methods, but I'm gonna use the word function until we have a better understanding what a method is, and that'll come when we do classes and objects and object-oriented programming, and a little bit later on. But right now I'm just going to call them functions. So what exactly is a function in programming? Well, a function in programming is kind of like the same thing that you remember from math class. So I'm just going to open up this here, and I'm going to create a function. And so this is a simple function. The function's name is f. It takes a parameter of x, and then it does some action, and I'll get some output. So if I did f of x or f of 5, I would get 2 times 5 is equal to 10. So this is the computation, this is the work that the function's doing, and this is the output of the function. So there's an input, there's some work that gets done, and there's an output. And the same thing in in coding, there is a function name. It takes some parameters. Now notice I have no parameters in here, and it does some work. And here the work that's done is it creates a window of size 500 by 500, and then at the end it's going to give some output. And in this case, the output is denoted by this word here. So it's actually void, and void means nothing. So the setup function has no input, and we're going to call these parameters from now on. So there's no parameters, and it returns nothing, but it does do something, and it does create a window that's 500 pixels by 500 pixels. So this is a little bit different than in a math formula where you always have an input and you always have some sort of output. You never have a function in math class that looks like this. Well, has a name, has no parameters. It does something, but it returns absolutely nothing. You don't have this in math class, at least nowhere I can think of. But in programming you do. And in programming you can have functions that take an input and give some output. Or you can have a function that takes some input and gives you nothing. Or you can have a function that takes nothing and gives you some output. Or you can have a function that takes nothing and makes nothing. And this is right here, this is actually what the setup is. It takes nothing and it gives you nothing. And that's perfectly acceptable in programming. Functions work in all four of these different ways. And later on, when we start creating our own functions, you're going to learn how to do this. Now, I'm explaining this all to you right now just because this can be a really confusing part when you first start programming. And I've noticed a lot of people kind of gloss over it and just say, well, yeah, just you need this to run the program, just stick it in here. But I want you to understand what this actually is. When the program starts, it comes in here and it looks through your whole file until it finds void setup. If it can't find void setup, it won't run. When it does find it, it will look here and it will start running from this line down. So it just starts running all the code in here. And it starts at the open bracket and then it runs to the close bracket. So this is the start of the function and this is the end of the function. And you can put as much stuff in here as you want and it will run that all. So it's kind of like if you had a function here and you said, all right, I want you to calculate 2x and 3x and 4x and a bunch of others and so on. Okay? So you can run a lot of stuff in a programming function. And we're going to use one other function here, and it also takes no input and it returns no values. Okay? And that's called void draw. Alright, so this function is necessary to run a program. This function is used to draw stuff to the screen. Now, you can actually draw stuff in here, but there's an important difference which you're going to learn in a lesson or two, the difference between this draw and setup. Okay, the way they work is very, very different. So let's go ahead and let's create something in draw. What we're going to do is we're going to look at a function called background. And background takes 3 parameters. So it's a different type of function. It's actually this function right here. It takes these inputs and it actually returns nothing. It does something. It does a computation, but it doesn't return a value or return anything. So it takes an input and it's going to take 3 inputs. So I have 0 and 0. Okay, so you're probably wondering what these numbers are here. Well, I have 3 numbers, and the smallest they can be is 0, and the biggest they can be is 255. And I'll tell you why in just a minute, but let's see what it actually does first. Alright, so it runs and it creates a red background. Alright, so I'm going to make this parameter 0, and I'm going to make this one 255 now. And so now I get green. And this one here, if I run it, I get blue. Alright, so obviously if I make this big, it's red, this is green, and this is blue. If I make these all 0, I get black. And what do you think I get if I make them all 255? If you guess white, then you are correct. So what is this? Well, if you have any experience with coloring anything, like any Photoshop work or anything like that, you've probably come across something like this. And you've seen over here this red, green, and blue. And you use these and you mix them together to get all the possible colors that a computer can make. And you're probably sitting there wondering, well, if you're an artist, you're saying, why aren't these the primary colors? Why is it red, green, blue and not the primary colors? Well, on a computer, it's just the way it is. I actually don't know the real reason. I'm sure you can do a search and figure out why. So if you look here at these numbers, when I had all 255, it was white. When I had all zeros, it was black. And everything in between is just a mixture of stuff. So you notice, like, if let's say I come over here, I don't know, let's take this kind of limeish green here. I'm going to round these numbers out a bit. So I'm going to make this 170 and I'll make this 10. Now I can take these three numbers and I can put them in here. 150, 170, and 10. And if I run this, my background is going to be that same color. Alright, so not the prettiest color, but we're not too worried about that. Alright, so let's do one more function here, and let's talk about the ellipse function. Now, the ellipse function draws an ellipse. Ellipse is like an oval or a circle. And I'm going to draw it at 100, 100, and I'm going to say 50, 50. Alright, so what do these actually do? Well, I have 4 parameters. Background has 3 and size has 2. So what do these 4 parameters do? Well, let's run. And we notice we get a circle right here. Now, I'm going to change one of these, and try to remember where this was, and I'm going to close this. I'm going to take this and I'm going to make this 300. Notice it's moved over to the right. So this is controlling your X. So it's controlling horizontal movement. And this is at 300 pixels. The center of the circle is 300 over here. So you can probably guess what this is. If I make this 200, you notice it has gone down. Now this part you're probably thinking, well, that's really weird. Why would it go down if the y value was larger? I remember math class. If functions are like math class, then this obviously must be like math class, and it should go up if I make my y value bigger. Well, when you're programming, you're working with graphics, and pretty much everything you use, this right here, the top left corner, is your 0, 0, and then as you go down, the y gets larger. So it's flipped from what you're used to when you use a Cartesian plane. And the x still goes horizontally, but the y-axis has been flipped. So as you go down, y gets larger. As you go up, y gets smaller. So if I put this at 0, 0, what I'm going to get is right here at the very corner. So the center of the circle moves right there. If I want to put this at the middle of the screen, I can say 250, 250. And I can put it right here at the middle, because remember our size is 500, so the middle would be at 250, 250. So what do you think these do? Well, I'm going to change this one, and it makes it wider. If I change this one, it's going to make it taller. So now I have a circle here that is 150 by 150. So these numbers are actually your diameter. It's not a radius of a circle, it's a diameter of a circle. So if I change this to, I don't know, 20, you're going to get a very narrow oval, a very narrow ellipse. All right? Okay, so here we have two functions. We have setup and draw, and then we have a couple other functions that we're using. And we're going to talk about how these work and where these all come from in the next tutorial. But the last thing I want to show you is that while this does say draw, you can actually draw things anywhere. If I come up here and I put this stuff in setup, it's not going to change what the program looks like. I'm still going to get that skinny looking oval right there. So draw is used to draw things, but you don't have to draw inside of it. And that's going to be important later because we're going to want to draw outside of the draw function. Okay. All right. If you have any questions, just leave them on the YouTube comments or on my website, and I'll try to get back to you on that. If you need to revise any of the vocab words or anything, you can see the supplementary materials that will be on my website. All right. Look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.